On a cold winter morning in early 2025, mother of two Ashley Elkins disappeared after leaving her home in Warren, Michigan to run a few errands. 5 days later, Ashley's car was found parked outside of an apartment complex in Roseville, a few miles from where her cell phone location last pinged. The search for Ashley would lead to a disturbing crime scene.
On a cold January morning in 2025, a mother of two walked out of her home and vanished without a trace. No warning, no goodbye, just a quiet departure that would soon spiral into one of the most chilling mysteries in Michigan. Her name is Ashley Elkins, a 30-year-old woman known for her bright smile, her love for her children, and a life that from the outside seemed completely normal. But within hours of her disappearance, something felt terribly wrong. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more real crime stories that uncover the dark truths behind headlines. Ashley had left her home in Warren on January 2nd. To her family, it was just another ordinary day. She told people she was heading out to run a few errands. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. No one imagined that it would be the last time they would ever see her. At first, the silence didn't seem too strange. People get busy. Phones die, plans change, but as the hours passed, Ashley stopped answering calls. Messages went unread. Her family tried again and again to reach her, each attempt building a growing knot of anxiety. Ashley wasn't the kind of person who disappeared without saying something, especially not when two young children were waiting for her to come home. By the next day, January 3rd, the worry had turned into fear. Her family reported her missing, and what began as a simple welfare check quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation. As detectives began retracing Ashley's last known movements, one detail stood out immediately. Before her phone went silent, location data showed she had traveled to an apartment in nearby Roseville. It was the home of her ex-boyfriend, DeAndre Booker. For investigators, that discovery would become the first piece of a puzzle that would soon reveal a far darker story. What exactly happened inside that apartment that day remains the central question of the case. But prosecutors would later allege something horrifying, that Ashley never walked out of that apartment alive. They believe Booker killed her there, and then tried to make her disappear. The accusation would shock the community. Ashley wasn't just another missing person poster. She was a daughter, a friend, and most painfully, a mother whose two children were suddenly left wondering why their mom never came home. Detectives began digging deeper into the relationship between Ashley and Booker, searching for clues about what might have happened during that final meeting. Friends and family described a complicated history between the two, a relationship that had already ended yet somehow still connected them. But as investigators pushed forward, something else made the case even more disturbing. Ashley's body was nowhere to be found. No confirmed crime scene, no remains, just a growing mountain of circumstantial evidence and a haunting question that refused to go away. Where was Ashley Elkins? Prosecutors would later accuse Booker of not only killing her but also disposing of her body and attempting to erase the evidence. The charges against him would become severe: first-degree premeditated murder, tampering with evidence, mutilation of a body, concealing a death, and lying to police. Yet despite those accusations, one crucial piece of the mystery still remains missing. Ashley herself. Somewhere, investigators believe, lies the final truth about what happened that January day. A truth buried in silence, hidden in evidence, and locked behind the walls of a courtroom that will soon decide the fate of the man accused of taking her life. But before the arrest, before the charges, and before the case captured national attention, there was a single moment when everything began to unravel. A final visit. A final phone signal. And the last known steps of a woman who had no idea she was walking straight into the most dangerous encounter of her life. Because what investigators would eventually uncover about that day would raise chilling questions about what happened inside that apartment, what evidence was left behind, and what someone may have done to make sure Ashley Elkins would never be found again. The last signal from Ashley's phone pointed investigators toward a quiet apartment in Roseville. It was an ordinary building, the kind of place people walked past every day without a second thought. But detectives would soon believe that inside one of those apartments, something terrible had happened to Ashley Elkins. At first, investigators had only fragments, a time stamp, a location ping, a few messages, nothing that clearly explained why Ashley had gone there or what happened after she arrived. But when detectives retraced her movements on January 2, the timeline slowly began to take shape. That morning had started like many others. Ashley was at home in Warren with her two young sons. Friends described her as a devoted mother who structured much of her life around caring for them. She worked, she spent time with family, and she rarely went anywhere without letting someone know where she would be. Which is why her disappearance immediately felt wrong. Sometime during the day, Ashley left her home and got into her vehicle. There was nothing unusual about the trip at first. No signs she expected trouble, no messages suggesting fear or concern. To anyone watching, it would have looked like an ordinary afternoon. But investigators later determined that Ashley had one specific destination. She was going to see her ex-boyfriend, DeAndre Booker. Exactly why the meeting happened that day is still a point of speculation. Some believe the two were trying to resolve lingering issues after their relationship ended. Others think the meeting may have been planned earlier. What detectives do know is that Ashley's phone location eventually placed her at Booker's apartment complex in Roseville. It would be the last confirmed location linked to her. When Ashley arrived, nothing immediately triggered alarm bells. People in the area reported no loud arguments, no disturbances, nothing that suggested violence. If anything happened inside that apartment, it happened quietly. And if prosecutors are right, it happened fast. At some point after Ashley arrived, her communication with family members became unusual. Text messages were sent from her phone, but relatives later said something about the tone felt off. The responses seemed short, strange, almost mechanical. One message suggested Ashley was going to a beauty supply store. But those who knew her best said it didn't sound like her. The conversation felt different, detached, almost as if someone else might have been holding the phone. As the evening approached, Ashley never returned home. Calls went unanswered. Texts received no reply. At first, her loved ones tried to remain calm. Phones die, plans change, but the longer the silence lasted, the more the unease grew. Ashley wasn't the type to simply disappear. By the next day, January 3, the worry had reached a breaking point. Her family contacted authorities and reported her missing. What began as a routine missing person report soon turned into something far more serious. Detectives began their investigation by doing what they always do in cases like this, rebuilding the final hours of a missing person's life. They checked surveillance cameras, they examined phone data, they spoke with family members and friends. Piece by piece, they tried to understand Ashley's final movements. And every road seemed to lead back to one place: the apartment in Roseville. Investigators soon made contact with Booker. At first, the conversation appeared routine. Detectives simply wanted to know whether he had seen Ashley that day. But according to investigators, the answers they received didn't add up. Booker reportedly told police that Ashley had visited but later left. The explanation seemed simple enough on the surface, but as detectives continued digging, they started noticing inconsistencies. Small contradictions, minor details that didn't line up. And in a missing person investigation, those kinds of discrepancies can quickly raise serious suspicions. Meanwhile, Ashley's family was growing increasingly desperate. Flyers were printed. Social media posts spread across the internet. Friends and volunteers began searching neighborhoods, hoping to find any clue that might lead them to her. But days passed with no sign of Ashley. Her car would eventually become another critical piece of the puzzle. Investigators located the vehicle not far from Booker's apartment complex. To detectives, the discovery raised new questions. If Ashley had left the area safely, why was her car still nearby? Why hadn't anyone seen her driving away? The deeper investigators looked, the more troubling the situation became. Detectives began examining the apartment complex more closely. Trash bins, nearby areas, and surrounding spaces were scrutinized for potential evidence. Search teams combed through anything that might reveal what happened inside that building. What they were looking for was proof. Proof that Ashley had been there. Proof of what happened next. And eventually, prosecutors would claim they found something that pointed toward violence. The details would later emerge in court filings and investigative reports, painting a picture of a confrontation that may have turned deadly. According to prosecutors, Ashley was killed inside Booker's apartment sometime after she arrived. But without a body, proving that allegation would be extraordinarily difficult. Cases without remains are among the most challenging for investigators. Without a victim recovered, defense attorneys often argue there is no definitive proof a crime even occurred. Which meant detectives needed something else. Evidence strong enough to show that Ashley didn't simply disappear, but that she was deliberately silenced. As the investigation intensified, authorities began examining digital evidence connected to Booker. Phones, devices, search histories. Investigators wanted to know what he had been doing in the hours and days after Ashley vanished. And what they allegedly discovered would become one of the most chilling aspects of the case. According to investigators, searches connected to Booker's devices suggested someone had been looking up ways to evade law enforcement detection. Questions about polygraph tests. Questions about deleting search histories. Questions about forensic evidence. To detectives, those searches raised serious concerns about whether someone might have been attempting to cover their tracks. Still, investigators needed more. And that search for answers soon led them somewhere few people ever imagined police might go. A dumpster near the apartment complex. What detectives believed might be hidden there would ultimately push the case in a dramatic new direction. Because inside the discarded trash from that building, investigators hoped they might find something that could finally reveal what happened to Ashley Elkins after she walked through that apartment door. Something small. Something overlooked. Something that might prove that January 2nd was not simply the day Ashley went missing, but the day she was killed. And as investigators prepared to dig deeper into the trash and the secrets surrounding Booker's apartment, the case against him was beginning to take shape. What they would soon uncover would transform a missing person investigation into a full-scale murder case. But the most disturbing discovery was still waiting to be found. And when it finally surfaced, it would raise a horrifying possibility. That someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure Ashley Elkins would never be seen again. The possibility that crucial evidence had been thrown away changed the direction of the entire investigation. Detectives knew that if prosecutors were right, if something violent had happened inside the apartment of DeAndre Booker, then whatever remained of that evidence might already be sitting somewhere in the trash system that served the apartment complex in Roseville. And that meant time was running out. Garbage trucks didn't wait for investigations. Once the trash left the complex, it would eventually be transported to a landfill, buried under tons of waste and nearly impossible to recover. If there was anything in those dumpsters connected to the disappearance of Ashley Elkins, detectives needed to find it before it vanished forever. Investigators began tracing the path of the garbage from the apartment complex. Which dumpsters had been emptied? When had the trucks arrived? Where had the trash been taken afterward? Every step mattered. What they discovered led them to a grim location. A landfill. Landfills stretch for acres, layered with mountains of waste delivered daily by garbage trucks from across surrounding communities. Once trash arrives there, it is compacted, buried, and blended into massive piles that grow by the hour. Searching a landfill is one of the most difficult tasks investigators can face. But in this case, detectives believed they had no choice. If Ashley's body had been disposed of through the apartment complex's trash system, then somewhere in that landfill might be the only remaining evidence of what happened to her. Teams began preparing for what would become an enormous search effort. Investigators mapped out which truck routes served the apartment complex on January 2nd and January 3rd. By analyzing pickup schedules, they attempted to narrow down the exact section of landfill where the trash might have been dumped. Even with that information, the area they had to search was still massive. Bulldozers moved carefully across the waste. Workers wearing protective suits sifted through layers of garbage piece by piece. The work was slow, exhausting, and emotionally draining. But detectives hoped that somewhere beneath the piles of discarded debris, They might find something that could confirm their worst fears. Meanwhile, investigators continued building their case against Booker. During questioning, authorities said his statements to police raised serious concerns. Detectives believed some of the information he provided didn't match the physical evidence they were collecting. According to investigators, Booker initially acknowledged that Ashley had visited his apartment. But beyond that, his version of events became difficult for detectives to verify. If Ashley had left his apartment safely, where had she gone? Why had no cameras captured her leaving? Why had her phone stopped responding shortly after arriving there? And why had her car been found near the complex? Each unanswered question tightened the focus on Booker. Eventually, investigators arrested him, not for murder at first, but for allegedly lying to police during the investigation. For detectives, it was a crucial step. Once someone is arrested in connection with an investigation, it allows law enforcement to dig deeper into evidence, execute additional warrants, and examine digital records more closely. And what they were about to uncover would intensify the case even further. Digital forensic teams began analyzing electronic devices connected to Booker. Phones, computers, internet searches, everything was examined for clues. According to investigators, the results were troubling. Search histories allegedly revealed questions that seemed unusually specific for someone connected to a missing person investigation. Questions about how polygraph tests work. Questions about deleting internet search history. Questions related to forensic evidence and investigations. To detectives, these searches raised a disturbing possibility. Someone might have been trying to figure out how to avoid getting caught. Meanwhile, Ashley's family continued living through a nightmare that had no clear ending. Every morning brought the same question: would today be the day investigators found her? Her two sons were left waiting for answers that no one could give them. Friends described the family's pain as overwhelming. They organized searches, spoke with reporters, and begged for anyone with information to come forward. Every lead, no matter how small, was followed. But days turned into weeks. And still Ashley had not been found. Back at the landfill search site, crews continued digging. Investigators knew the odds were against them. Finding specific evidence in a landfill is often compared to searching for a needle in a haystack, but even that analogy might underestimate the challenge. A single day's worth of garbage deliveries can weigh thousands of tons. And yet investigators kept searching. Because even the smallest piece of evidence could change everything. A fragment of clothing. A personal belonging. DNA. Something, anything, that could connect what happened inside Booker's apartment to the disappearance of Ashley Elkins. While the landfill search continued, prosecutors began preparing for what they believed was inevitable. A murder charge. Despite the fact that Ashley's body had not been recovered, investigators believed they had gathered enough evidence to show that a homicide had occurred. The timeline. The phone data. The suspicious messages. The inconsistencies in Booker's statements. And the physical evidence they believed linked Ashley directly to the trash disposal system connected to the apartment complex. For prosecutors, the picture was becoming clearer. They alleged that sometime after Ashley arrived at Booker's apartment on January 2nd, a confrontation occurred. That confrontation, they claimed, ended with Ashley's death. What happened next, they argued, was an attempt to erase the crime. According to prosecutors, Ashley's body was disposed of possibly through the trash before investigators ever realized she was missing. If true, it would explain why no one had seen her leave the apartment complex, and why finding her had become so incredibly difficult. Eventually, prosecutors moved forward with the charges. Booker would be formally accused of first-degree premeditated murder, along with multiple additional counts including tampering with evidence, concealing a death, and mutilation of a body. The allegations stunned the community. A missing mother of two. An ex-boyfriend accused of killing her. And a case built largely on circumstantial evidence, digital records, and forensic investigation. But one haunting reality still remained. Ashley Elkins had not been found. Without her body, prosecutors would face a major challenge in court. they would have to convince a jury that a murder occurred even though the victim had never been recovered. Cases like that are rare, but they are not impossible. As the legal battle began to take shape, investigators continued their relentless search for Ashley, hoping that somewhere, somehow, the truth would finally emerge. Because until she was found, one piece of the story remained missing. And that missing piece could ultimately determine whether justice would ever be served for Ashley Elkins. But as the investigation moved closer to the courtroom, another shocking development was about to change the case once again. A discovery that prosecutors believed would strengthen their argument that Ashley didn't simply disappear. She was killed, and someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide it. By the time prosecutors formally filed murder charges, the case had already become one of the most disturbing investigations in Michigan that year. A young mother had vanished without a trace, and the man investigators believed was responsible sat at the center of a growing mountain of evidence. But one haunting truth still lingered over everything. Ashley Elkins had still not been found. For her family, that absence made every day harder. Without answers, there was no closure. Without a body, there was no funeral, no place to grieve properly, just a painful silence where Ashley's presence used to be. Investigators, however, believed they had seen enough to understand what had happened inside that apartment in Roseville. They believed Ashley's final moments began with a meeting that should have been routine. Instead, prosecutors say it turned deadly. According to the prosecution's theory, Ashley arrived at the apartment of DeAndre Booker on January 2, 2025. What happened next remains known only to two people, and only one of them is still alive. But detectives believe a confrontation occurred. The exact reason for that confrontation has never been publicly confirmed. Relationships that end often leave unresolved tension behind, and investigators suspected there may have been lingering issues between the two. Whatever sparked the conflict, prosecutors allege that Ashley was killed inside the apartment. What they claim happened afterward is what makes the case especially chilling. Instead of calling for help, instead of contacting authorities, investigators believe Booker began trying to erase what had happened. According to prosecutors, evidence suggested that Ashley's body was removed from the apartment and disposed of, possibly through the trash system connected to the building. If that theory is correct, it would explain why the landfill search became such a critical part of the investigation. It would also explain why finding Ashley has been so incredibly difficult. Once trash enters a landfill, it is crushed, buried, and layered beneath thousands of pounds of debris within hours. Recovering anything from that environment is extraordinarily rare. Despite those odds, search teams spent days combing through sections of landfill connected to the apartment complex's trash pickup routes. Investigators hoped they might locate something connected to Ashley, a personal item, clothing, or even remains. But the search ended without a definitive discovery. For Ashley's family, it was devastating. The possibility that she might be buried somewhere beneath a mountain of waste was almost impossible to process. Yet investigators warned that it was a realistic scenario. Still, prosecutors believed the evidence they had gathered told a powerful story. They argued that Ashley's sudden disappearance, the location data placing her at Booker's apartment, the suspicious messages sent from her phone, and the evidence investigators believed was tied to the trash disposal system created a clear picture. A picture of a murder followed by an attempt to conceal it. Eventually, the charges were formally announced. Booker would face one of the most serious accusations possible under the law: first-degree premeditated murder. Alongside that charge were several others: tampering with evidence, disinterment or mutilation of a dead body, concealing a death, and lying to a police officer. Each charge carried significant consequences. Together, they painted a picture of a crime that prosecutors believed had been carefully hidden. But inside the courtroom, everything would come down to proof. Booker pleaded not guilty. His defense team would likely argue that without a body, prosecutors could not definitively prove Ashley was dead. In cases like this, defense attorneys often challenge every piece of circumstantial evidence, pointing out that disappearance alone does not equal murder. It's a strategy that has worked before. But prosecutors appeared confident that their case would withstand scrutiny. They believed the timeline told a clear story. Ashley leaves her home in Warren. Her phone places her at Booker's apartment in Roseville. She is never seen again. Her car is later found near the complex. And the messages sent from her phone that day raise serious questions about who was actually typing them. For investigators, those details formed a chain of events that pointed strongly in one direction. Toward the apartment, toward the final meeting, and toward the man they believe was responsible. Still, one part of the case continues to haunt everyone involved. Ashley's children. They were just 7 and 10 years old when their mother disappeared, too young to fully understand the complexity of an investigation but old enough to feel the painful absence in their lives. Family members have spoken about how difficult it has been to explain what happened. How do you tell children that their mother left one day and never came back? How do you explain that the truth may be buried somewhere investigators still haven't found? For Ashley's loved ones, the hope has never completely faded. Even after months of searching, they continue to pray that someday her remains will be located so she can finally be laid to rest. Until then, the courtroom may be the only place where the truth can fully emerge. Trials in cases like this are often intense and emotional. Prosecutors will present the evidence they believe proves Ashley was murdered. Defense attorneys will challenge every detail. Jurors will be asked to weigh the facts, examine the timeline, and decide whether the story prosecutors tell is strong enough to convict a man of murder without a body ever being found. It's one of the most difficult decisions a jury can face. But regardless of the outcome, one fact remains undeniable. A young mother vanished on January 2, 2025. She walked out of her home expecting to return to her children. She never did. And somewhere out there, hidden in a place investigators have yet to uncover, lies the final piece of the story of Ashley Elkins. A piece that could finally answer the question everyone has been asking since the moment she disappeared. What really happened inside that apartment in Roseville? Did a tragic argument spiral into violence? Did someone panic and try to erase the crime? Or is there still a part of this mystery that investigators have yet to uncover? For now, the truth sits at the center of a courtroom battle that will determine whether justice is served for Ashley Elkins, or whether the case of the missing mother will remain one of the most haunting mysteries in recent Michigan history. But now we want to hear from you. Do you think the evidence against DeAndre Booker is enough for a conviction even without a body, or do you think there are still unanswered questions in the disappearance of Ashley Elkins? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinion matters, and this discussion helps keep Ashley's story alive and her case in the public eye. And most importantly, if you were on that jury, what would your verdict be?